We're about to dive into a set of ancient laws that, might seem a little strange at first glance. But stick with me, because they reveal this incredibly deep worldview, and it all centers on one thing: blood. And these weren't just friendly suggestions, they were absolute commands.
Wow. Okay, so right out of the gate, we get hit with this unbelievably intense warning. This is not messing around. The consequence for breaking this rule? Total excommunication. Getting cut off from your entire community. No excuses, no second chances. This was an ironclad law.
And that, of course, leads to the big question, why? Why this incredible focus on blood? Why was this one command so final, so uncompromising? Well, the answer goes way deeper than just diet. It gets to the heart of a foundational belief about life itself.
To really get to the bottom of this, we've got to unpack the core principle behind it all. And it's actually a beautifully simple idea, but it's so powerful that it shapes everything else we're about to see.
It really just boils down to this direct equation. In the worldview we're looking at, blood wasn't just, some fluid in the body. It was the physical stand-in for life itself, the very essence of a living thing. So to handle blood was to handle life.
And what's so great is that the text doesn't make us guess. It just comes right out and says it. The logic is laid out for us right there. The rule exists because the life of a creature is in its blood. That direct connection is the key to understanding this entire system.
And because this was seen as this kind of universal truth about how life works, the law wasn't just for one group of people. Nope, it applied to every single person living in that community. It didn't matter if you were native-born or a foreigner who had moved in. If you were there, you lived by this rule.
Okay, so what's the next layer? If blood equals life, then it must have had a really unique, really sacred purpose that needed to be protected, right? You couldn't just treat it casually. It was set aside for something incredibly important. And that purpose is all about this idea of atonement. Now, this is a super important word for us. Think of it like this. It's the process of fixing a broken relationship, of making things right again between people and the divine after something's gone wrong.
So the idea here is that blood was seen as this sacred substance with one single holy job. Its proper place was on the altar as a key part of the ritual that made that atonement, that spiritual repair possible. So to eat it would be to completely violate its sacred purpose.
And again, just to make it crystal clear, the text flat out says it. It is the blood that does the work of atonement. It's the life force, represented by that blood, that's offered up to heal that spiritual break. This gives blood a religious significance that is just off the charts.
So, if blood is life, and its whole purpose is for atonement on the altar, how did they make sure this was actually respected in daily life? How did this system work in practice? Well, the answer was a pretty radical move. They centralized all of worship.
The system became really straightforward. You couldn't just set up an altar and make a sacrifice wherever you felt like it. To stop blood from being misused or disrespected, every single legitimate offering had to be brought to one official place, what they called the tent of meeting.
And this created this huge shift. It was a total before and after picture. So no more sacrificing out in the open fields, and definitely no more making offerings to what the text calls goat idols. Instead, everything was funneled to the one tent of meeting, where the blood was handled properly and put on the Lord's altar.
You see, this was way more than just picking a spot on a map. Centralizing worship was a massive theological statement. It was like a spiritual firewall against paganism, making absolutely sure that the life force of an animal, its blood, was given only to the Lord and not to any other gods.
But this brings up a pretty logical question, doesn't it? The rules for sacrifices at the altar are clear. But what about just regular life? What if you're a hunter, out trying to get food for your family? Did the same ideas still apply?
And the answer is yes. They absolutely did. The text lays out a very specific procedure. After you hunt an animal that's okay to eat, you have a two-part responsibility. First, you have to drain all of the blood out of it, and second, you have to cover that drained blood with dirt, basically returning it to the earth. Even outside of a religious ceremony, the life force was treated with respect.
So, when you start putting all these different pieces together, the big prohibition, the laws for sacrifice, the rules for hunting, you begin to see this complete and really consistent worldview take shape. It's a world built entirely on the idea of sanctity.
And get this, the system was so thorough, it even had rules for things that were totally out of your control. Like, what if you just stumble upon an animal that's already dead, maybe killed by a predator? You couldn't control how it died, but you were still responsible for how you dealt with it.
So if a person, again, native-born or foreigner, ate from an animal like that, one whose blood wasn't properly handled, they weren't cut off, but they did enter a state of what was called ritual uncleanness. And to get clean again, they had to wash their clothes and bathe. If they blew that off, the text says they would be held responsible.
So what's the big takeaway from all this? Well, from the holy altar to the open field, from a planned sacrifice to a random discovery, every single one of these laws points back to one powerful idea. Life is sacred. Its symbol is blood, and that blood must always be treated with profound respect.
And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. When an entire society builds its rules around the idea that life itself is sacred, and that this sanctity is physically represented in blood, how does that change everything? How does it shape their values, their ethics, their entire way of seeing the world? It's a pretty powerful question these ancient commands force us to think about.